Australians in our biggest cities are very concerned about the rate of population growth.
This is the balance which we have to strike. Overall, migration has been very good for our economic growth. At the same time, though, when most of the migration is going into Melbourne and Sydney, it puts enormous pressure on those cities, and people are feeling it.
In what could be the biggest cut to migration since the 1990s, Scott Morrison has signalled a reduction of about 30,000 to Australia's migration program.
Now, I believe that this is likely to end up in revising down the permanent migration cap in Australia. That would be my expectation.
It's the latest chapter in the population conversation in lieu of any formal policy announcement, designed to soothe city-siders stuck in traffic, but not malign the business community or regional areas who need growth. It amounts to a change of heart for Scott Morrison, who began the year as both Treasurer and less keen on cuts to migration.
If you cut the level of permanent immigration to Australia by 80,000, that would cost the budget, that would hit the bottom line, the deficit, by $4 to $5 billion over the next 4 years.
There are three fundamental factors which drive population: births, deaths, and migration. See, the last time we were having enough babies to keep our population stable was back in 1976. And not even the controversial baby bonus back in 2002 was enough to turn things around. Meanwhile, life expectancy has grown to 80.5 years for men and 84.6 years for women, and no amount of government policy can ultimately prevent deaths. That leaves migration as the only practical lever of population control. And over the last decade, we've been importing more people than are being born here. That's why when we talk about population, what we're really talking about is migration and what role it'll play in the future of Australia. In the government's new plan, left to consult with the states over their desired migration levels, is Minister for Population, Alan Tudge.
What we're going to do is we're asking the states and territories as to what their population plans are, what capacity do they have now and in the future to cater for population growth, and then we're going to aggregate those figures up in order to set our migration settings. The real challenge is at the federal level, we control the major population growth lever, which is migration, while the states and territories have the responsibility for delivering the infrastructure, the schools and the hospitals and the like, to cater for that population growth.
But haven't the states proven themselves incapable of building the infrastructure needed to keep up?
Sometimes you get a mismatch between the aspirations of the state governments and indeed what the federal government might do.
But one former senior Immigration Department official says today's population predicament has its roots in the decisions taken by Scott Morrison when he was Immigration Minister.
Scott Morrison did three things. He firstly locked in the migration program at 190,000 per annum by linking it to the budget. Secondly, he significantly boosted the level of overseas students, who drove the increase in net overseas migration, particularly to Sydney and Melbourne. Thirdly, he reduced the usage of regional visas very significantly, the very visas that he now says we need to increase the usage of.
I think you've got to look back a little bit further when the migration took a step change increase back in 2007 under Kevin Rudd. Now we've reduced that level down since that time, but what we're signalling here is that we want to do a much more bottom-up approach towards migration setting rather than a top-down. And that will probably result in a migration reduction of maybe 30,000 or so, but the process will determine that.
Some are not convinced that migration can be blamed for congestion in our cities.
I think migrants are being blamed for something they didn't create. They're looking for better opportunities. Australia is offering them those better opportunities, and their labour is needed. The congestion problems, all that kind of stuff, that's due to planning. And it's sending out a message saying, we don't want migrants. we think they're not helping us and they're causing our problems. And so your best and brightest may be more reluctant to come to Australia, especially if they don't have a clear pathway to permanent residence.
Is the government ultimately unwilling to make a policy announcement in this space in fear of angering the business community, who are reliant on cheap labour that's concentrated in the cities?
So this is a process, and we've announced that we're going to be writing formally to the premiers and the chief ministers, and then there'll be a COAG meeting in December, and then we'll be announcing our full policy early next year.
Immigration policy needs to be thought of as a long-term lever, not something you whip together just before the next election.